welcome to American Catholic History, brought to you by the support of listeners like you. If you like American Catholic history, please become a supporter at americancatholichistory.org. Also, if you don't already, be sure to follow the podcast and give us a 5-star rating and a great review wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Noelle Heaster-Crow.
And I'm Tom Crow.
Today, we're talking about one of our favorite figures on American Catholic history. She's known as the fastest nun in the West. She was a pint-sized spitfire of a woman who would have given John Wayne a run for his money in Taming the West.
She actually did gain the respect of Billy the Kid, so yeah, I think you're right.
No, we're talking about Sister Blandina Segale, and she led a remarkable life that we've had to break up her story into 2 episodes. It was so remarkable.
Absolutely. Her exploits in the Wild West were just one big part of her story. But after 2 decades staring down lynch mobs, evangelizing outlaws, fighting for the rights of the natives, building schools and orphanages with her own hands, and of course, sharing the love of Christ with everyone who would listen, she was recalled to Cincinnati, where she was just as much a force of nature for the immigrants and the poor in that town for many more decades.
So we've got a lot to cover. Let's start with her beginnings. Sister Blandina was born Rosa Maria Segale in 1850 to very poor parents near Genoa in what was then the Kingdom of Sardinia. When she was just 4 years old, as the battles to unify Italy ramped up, her parents fled Italy for the United States, settling in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Her education was with the Sisters of Charity, the order founded by St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. From a very early age, she determined that she would become a Sister of Charity and told her father as much.
Well, she made up her mind and then just did the thing. So out of character.
I know, right? But yes, she decided that that's what she would do from early on. So as soon as she was able, at 16 years old, she entered that religious community. Soon after, her older sister, Maria Maddalena, also entered the Sisters of Charity. Rosa was given the religious name Blandina, and Maria was named Justina.
In short order, Sister Blandina was sent to teach. And happily for us, she was sent across the state to teach right here in Steubenville, Ohio. Since at the time there was only one parish in town, St. Peter, which is our parish, that means she actually taught at St. Peter.
So we had St. John Newman serve at St. Peter as a circuit priest in the 1840s, and a few years later, Sister Blandina as a teacher.
And I love that about our parish.
Absolutely.
It's so cool.
Yeah, me too. And it was while she was here in Steubenville in 1872 that she found out she had been reassigned to far off Trinidad.
Trinidad, that idyllic Caribbean island. Who wouldn't love going to be a missionary
Drinking
there?
rum and Coca-Cola.
I mean, sounds pretty good.
Yeah, but that is what she initially thought, the idyllic Caribbean island. And she wrote to her sister, Sister Justina, telling her so. But she soon found out it wasn't the tropical island. It was the frontier mining town of Trinidad, Colorado.
That's not quite so idyllic.
No.
What's also not idyllic was that she was being sent there on her own.
What's more, some of the men of Steubenville who had been out west, upon hearing the news, pulled her aside and warned her about some of the dangers she would face. The cross-country trek, they told her, would include train and stagecoach. That would mean dealing with dangerous Indians, deadly weather, and, worst of all, cowboys.
Well, they warned her that no virtuous woman was safe around cowboys.
No, of course not. So, thus warned and prepared, she set off, all 5'0" of her, to charge into the American Wild West, and as she said, go where I am sent and do what needs to be done.
At age 22.
Just 22.
And 5'0" nothing.
5'0".
Now, it's important to note that much of what we know about her time out west is from her own letters, which she began writing to her sister, Sister Justina, on the 2nd day of her trek west.
Yes, and this massive collection of letters was published in a book called At the End of the Santa Fe Trail, and I gotta say, as I was skimming through and reading chunks of it here and there, it is delightful. Her writing is quick and straightforward and frequently humorous. She has a great style. We'll have a link to it so you can get your own copy.
So the first leg of her journey from Cincinnati to Kansas City brought the first bit of her adventure. She asked for lodging at a convent in Kansas City, but the sisters there were very skeptical that she was actually a sister. She was traveling alone and she hadn't brought any official identification of being a sister of charity. So they gave her a couch to sleep on in a locked first floor parlor with sisters of that convent standing guard outside through the night.
She initially was annoyed, but later reflected on that experience, recalling that she herself had been hoodwinked a few years earlier while she was in Steubenville. She had been put in charge of a couple of Franciscan nuns who had come to town to do some fundraising, and it wasn't until the sisters had left that she found out, from the police tracking them, that the two sisters were actually a husband and wife con act. So she didn't blame those sisters for disbelieving her.
So the next day, Sister Blandina stepped on a train heading for the western end of the line and found herself in a car full of Irishmen heading to where work was, and many of them were smoking pipes. Upon her entry, they all removed their caps and stopped their smoking, very gentlemanly, until she said to the two men seated near her, "Please say to these good men that I am very fond of smoke from a pipe." Caps were replaced on heads and smoking resumed, and everyone relaxed. She said, "I doubt which side was more pleased, they to have me or I to be with them."
Yeah, and as one who enjoys a pipe every now and then, I can imagine their relief. But perhaps the most harrowing but quickly humorous part of her trek to Trinidad was at the very end. She had to take a stagecoach from where the train ended in the town of Kit Carson, Colorado, about 170 miles southwest, to Trinidad. Mind you, it was early December, so she was well bundled up in blankets, or a comfort, as she called it. We'll let her tell the story as related in her letters.
The driver opened the stage door and said, "You will have a traveling companion for some miles." In the door, by the light of the lantern, I saw a tall, lanky, Hoosier-like man wearing a broad-brimmed hat. On one arm, he had a buffalo robe. While I sat riveted, he got in, asked me if I would take part of his kiver, and before my fright permitted me to speak, he placed part of the buffalo robe over the comfort that enwrapped me and sat beside me on the rear seat. The driver closed the door, and we were in utter darkness. By descriptions I had read, I know he was a cowboy. With crushing vividness, "No virtuous woman is safe near a cowboy," came to me. I made an act of contrition, concentrated my thoughts on the presence of God, thought of the Archbishop's blessing, "Angels, guard your steps," and moved to such position as would put my heart in range with his revolver. I expected he would speak. I answer, he fire. The agony endured cannot be written. The silence and suspense unimaginable. Suddenly, from out the darkness, I heard,
"Madam,
"Sir?"
what kind of lady be you?"
"A sister of charity."
"Whose sister?"
"Everyone's sister, a person who gives her life to do good to others."
Quaker-like, I reckon."
No, not quite. By this time I learned from his tone of voice that I had nothing to fear. He asked me a number of questions, all prompted by a conversation he had had with the driver before he came into the stage. In my turn, I asked him why he became a cowboy. He said he had read of cowboys and ran away from home to become one. "Is your mother still living?"
"Yes, I allow she is. Leastwise, she was when I left home 6 years ago."
"Have you written to her?"
"No, madam, and I allow that's beastly."
"It certainly is unkind to one whom you can always trust and who, I am sure, loves you as much now as she did when you were a little fellow." His voice got husky.
What do you say I ought to do?"
"Right. Do, as soon as you get off this stage, tell her you will soon make her a visit and see to it that you keep your word.
I will. Help me God. I was mighty feared to speak to you when I got in because the mule driver said you was more particular than any lady he ever seen. I allow I am powerful glad I spoke to you.
To think that this lubberly, good-natured cowboy had made me undergo such mortal anguish.
That was fun. Yeah, so that basically ended her fear of cowboys.
And hopefully your cowboy impressions.
I don't know. I thought it was kind of good.
It was a very different interaction than she thought she would have.
Certainly.
She would overcome a whole lot of other limitations during her time out west. Once in Trinidad, Sister Blandina joined the other 3 Sisters of Charity who were already there and began teaching.
Trinidad was barely a town. Mud huts, dugouts, some structures, but not much to speak of. The school was a crumbling, windowless, vermin-infested adobe structure. When she found there was no money allotted to build a new school, she literally took a crowbar to the current school and began tearing off the roof to build a new one. When passers-by would ask what in tarnation she was doing, she would tell them by way of handing them a hammer and putting them to work. She got a new school built through donations, cajoling volunteers, and hard work.
Well, it was like she was both Mother Maria and Homer Smith from the movie Lilies of the Field, rolled into one.
Yes, I love that. Schmidt, you build a chapel. But she had no Schmidt, so she did it.
Right. And it wasn't just the school building itself that she worked to reform. Her approach to discipline in the classroom diffused some very tense situations and utterly confounded some of the really tough boys who were constantly ready for a fight. She would not respond with violence, but rather with explanation and pointed questions, and then send them to their seats, utterly confused by what just happened.
One of my favorite stories was when some of the students were speaking in Spanish to one another, not realizing that she had picked up enough Spanish to understand them. And when they finished their conversation about what they were going to do to beat up this one boy on the playground, she pulled them aside and didn't, during free time or recess, didn't let them go out. And then in Spanish, basically told them, I know everything you said. You better not do that. It just diffused the situation, and yeah, it was one of those things because she's listening anyway. But overall, she was about forgiveness, justice, and discussing problems rather than fighting because she hated violence.
And that definitely extended to the kill or be killed law of the West. Her approach was more love, that God may be loved.
And that manifested in 2 other crazy tales. First, she found out that the father of one of her students was in the local jail for having mortally wounded a young Irishman with a shotgun. A mob had gathered outside the jail waiting for word that the victim had died. They intended to storm the jail and lynch the killer. But it seemed that the shooting was not intentional, or at least the shooter was not in his right mind when he did it. The son of the shooter, the boy who was her student, came to her to plead for her help.
Sister Blandina determined to stop the lynching. First, she went to the dying man and worked to help him find it in his heart to forgive his shooter. Then she went to the sheriff and asked that he join her in escorting the shooter past the bloodthirsty mob to the victim's bed, where he would confess and beg forgiveness.
The sheriff was understandably taken aback and asked incredulously, "What has any sheriff here ever been able to do to prevent a mob from carrying out its intent?"
And Sister Blandina replied, "Be the first sheriff to make the attempt."
Of course. The sheriff must have decided that they had nothing really to lose, so he went along with it. The plan worked. The young Irishman forgave the man before he died. The lynch mob dispersed, and the shooter remained safely in jail until his case could go to trial and he was sent to prison, later being released to an asylum for reasons of mental illness.
One of the shooter's daughters, many years later, wrote to Sister Blandina, thanking her for saving her father's life.
And lynching as a common practice in Trinidad effectively ended.
Now, this incredible intervention was dramatized in a 1966 episode of the show Death Valley Days, which was narrated by none other than Ronald Reagan. The episode was titled The Fastest Nun in the West, And that title has stuck to Sister Blandina ever since.
As she was a force of nature.
Yes, she was. Now, the other crazy story involves a group of her better students whom she called the Vigilant Club. She had specially charged these students with alerting her about anyone who was in serious trouble or who needed help of any sort. She would see to it that they got the help they needed. Some of these students came to her because they found that one of the henchmen of the outlaw, Billy the Kid, had been wounded and left to die in a hut on the outskirts of town.
Now, in the interests of accuracy, we must note that this Billy the Kid is not the one of legend about whom Billy Joel wrote a rather fun song.
Right. No, the one we're talking about here was the original, but less well-known Billy the Kid. But he was also an outlaw who robbed stagecoaches and banks and all the things, did all the things that outlaws do. The two Billy the Kids, or Billy's the Kid?
Yeah, whatever.
Which one of those ways? They were contemporaries, but the second one was the more famous one. Sister Blandina was connected to the original or the first Billy the Kid.
Okay, so that's stipulated for posterity. Sister went to this wounded bandit and nursed his wounds, and she and the vigilant students brought him food. She kept coming to him without ever introducing the topic of faith and belief. When he finally brought up the topic, he said that if she'd come to him preaching all the time, he'd have sent her away to let him die in peace. But since she just came and cared for him so tenderly, he finally mustered the courage and humility to ask if God could forgive his many sins.
Sister responded with scriptural references. If your sins were as scarlet or as numerous as the sands on the seashore, turn to me, says the Lord, and I will forgive.
The man pondered that response, and they had many conversations. He took some instruction in the faith from her, learning some prayers, and those who were with him on the day he died reported that he said an act of contrition and died saying the prayers that she had taught him. Sister Blandina wrote, "He is in God's just yet merciful hands."
The whole episode got back to Billy the Kid, who returned to the town bent on killing and scalping the 3 or 4 doctors who had refused to treat the wounded man. But before committing the murders, Sister Blandina intervened. Billy gave her an audience since she'd been the one to help his guy and promised that he would do anything she wished as a thank you. Sister Blandina asked that he spare the doctors' lives. Billy probably thought she'd ask for money or something, but he was true to his word. He left town without shedding blood.
And her connection to Billy the Kid had a second act as well. Later, when she was on a stagecoach, a cry went up that riders were approaching. The men in the stage knew that most likely meant bandits, and it would most likely mean it was Billy the Kid. They all drew their revolvers, ready to defend themselves as best they could.
Sister Blandina had no revolver, but as the riders neared, she leaned to the window and adjusted her bonnet so Billy could see her face. Billy saw Sister square in the face, tipped his cap, and rode away. The stage was spared.
Sister was only in Trinidad for 5 years before being sent to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where her directive was to do as you did in Trinidad. And she did. She built schools, an orphanage, and other institutions. Though the city fathers had not yet thought it right to install a city water and sewage system or gas service, she saw that the future included both, so she insisted that her buildings include plumbing for when those services were made available.
Then she was sent to Albuquerque, where she did more of the same, founding the hospital, which was the main Catholic hospital in that city until fairly recently.
We've actually visited the building where she had her convent in Albuquerque. Most of it is now the museum and gift shop attached to the historic St. Philip Neri Church, which is right on the historic square of Old Albuquerque. That building was only 1 story when she took it over and made it the convent. But as time went on and she had more sisters to accommodate, she decided to add a second floor. The locals told her she couldn't add a second floor because the walls are made of adobe and, they insisted, adobe couldn't support the weight of a second floor.
Well, as you probably realize by now, she wasn't one to take "you can't do that" without trying. So she had the walls thickened to nearly 3 times the normal thickness of adobe walls, and she put on a second floor. And that building still stands.
Just a remarkable determination and perseverance. Her 21 years in the Southwest were also filled with caring for the Mexican and American Indian populations and advocating for their rights. Many were defrauded of their land or outright robbed of it by American settlers, and she wrote about how utterly appalling were the tactics used against them. She fought against those injustices early and often, and with the same energy and dedication she brought to everything else.
In the early 1890s, she had a second stint in Trinidad. By this point, Trinidad had grown considerably, and the school she'd built was thriving. She returned to teach, but due to anti-Catholic sentiment, the local government prohibited the sisters from wearing their habits while teaching. Sister fought hard against this injustice, but lost. In 1892, after 20 years in the Wild West, she was called back to the mother house in Cincinnati. She had gone out west alone at just 22 years old. She faced down lynch mobs, befriended Billy the Kid, and formed a generation of students to care about each other and about their education. She built hospitals, orphanages, and schools. She fought injustice and brought the light and peace of Christ to a place where might makes right, which more often was the law of the land. But if you can believe it, the next 50 years she spent in Cincinnati after all of this was equally remarkable. But we'll leave that story for our next episode. This has been American Catholic History. If you enjoy American Catholic History, please become a supporter. We've got great perks for supporters. Get information on how to become a supporter and the perks at americancatholichistory.org/support.
Also on our website, sign up for our newsletter, learn more about Sister Blandina Segale, see about our pilgrimages, and find other great stories from American Catholic history.
We also love the great reviews our listeners leave. Those and the 5-star ratings help others find us. You also can email us feedback, questions, tips for episode topics, or other comments at feedback@americancatholichistory.org. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/American Catholic History, on Instagram at ACH_podcast, and follow us on Twitter at ACH1513. I'm Noelle Heaster-Crowe.
And I'm Tom Crow.
Thanks for listening to American Catholic History, brought to you by the support of listeners like you.